Hi, I'm Edwin Rutsch, Director of the Center for Building a Culture of Empathy, and I'm here today with Jeremy Rosen. Welcome, Jeremy, for taking part in this dialogue with me.
Good morning. It's an important subject, and I'm delighted and honored.
Okay, so let me just, what I saw about you is that you're an English-born Orthodox rabbi, graduate of, I don't know if I'm pronouncing this properly, Mir Yeshiva?
Yeah, you got it spot on.
Okay. And the Cambridge University. And is there more you'd like to share? I know you're a lecturer and some other.
No, that's fine. I came to New York to retire and to enjoy life, and then found myself caught up in a community of former pupils of mine from England, from Iran. So I'm now a kind of rabbi of a little Iranian community.
Oh, interesting.
But basically, I'm semi-retired and enjoying life in New York.
Okay, well, the reason I reached out is I'm advocating for a culture of empathy. How do we create a more empathic world? And you had written an article where you had referenced Paul Bloom, who's writing against empathy. And then I thought I always like to reach out to people who are, kind of against empathy or kind of, looking at that those issues. So I thought we could talk about your article, your thoughts on empathy, and you'd also talked about sympathy and compassion, and there seems to be a lot of confusion between those different words. And I had also seen you were sort of trying to make sense, kind of work out the differences and nuances between those words. And maybe you'd like to share a little bit about your thoughts to begin with.
Well, you see, my training is in linguistic philosophy, Wittgenstein, and therefore the meaning of words is very, very important in every aspect of my life. And most of the conflicts take place over words, what we mean by words, what we mean by God, for argument's sake. And empathy, sympathy, compassion are words that are often confused and overlapped, and what do we mean by them? And that's basically what Bloom was looking at. So I understand there is a difference between empathy and sympathy. And the difference between the two is that whereas sympathy involves concern for another person, to be able to sense that there is an issue that should involve my concern for the other. And that is the very important term for me. Mm-hmm. Whereas empathy usually means I really feel what you feel. Mm-hmm. And feeling what you feel is something which I think is much more difficult to talk about, because from a purely philosophical point of view, there is no way I feel what you feel. I may see the spot on your nose if you've got a spot on your nose, but I don't know how much pain it's giving you, or none at all. So I can only extrapolate from my experience to your experience, which is why what Bloom said resonated with me. We use this term empathy too loosely and too pointlessly. So it's also relevant to me from a Jewish point of view. And from a Jewish point of view, there are two issues. There's the historical issue. The Bible tells the people of Israel that you must always know what it's like to be a stranger, because you were strangers. You must know. And it goes further than that. It says you've got to know the soul of a stranger. So that is obviously more than sympathy. Mm-hmm. It almost is as though the Bible is talking about this word empathy. Except, of course, this was addressed to people who were no longer slaves. So they didn't have that experience to go through, and therefore it was more a historical narrative. We have a historical narrative of knowing what the stranger is like.
Mm. Okay. So I'm getting there is you're seeing that sympathy has a quality of concern for someone else, whereas empathy you see is trying to understand other people's feelings or kind of feel into their...
To have that feeling.
Oh, to have the feeling.
To have that feeling.
I
to
see.
Understand is always good.
Oh, okay.
Empathy goes further. Empathy says, I know what it's like for you to be tortured because I was tortured.
I see.
Right? So now I can sympathize with somebody who was tortured because I've experienced pain, but I've not experienced their pain. And therefore, a lot of, if I can say I understand what happened in Rwanda, and I understand it's horrific and it's terrible, and I would like to do whatever I can possibly do, either to make up for it or to compensate for it. But I can't say that I've experienced what they experienced.
Mm-hmm.
So that's the first point.
Okay.
The degree, and I think empathy goes to an unrealistic degree, whereas I think sympathy is really what one should be focusing on.
Okay, so in that case, empathy would be the people in Rwanda have suffered in a way through this genocide, but I can't really know what it is that they're feeling because I haven't necessarily felt that, or I'm not feeling that myself. So I just really can't get what it is that's going on.
But then there's the second side. And the second side aspect to this is relevant to me as a Jew in a situation where I feel that most of the world either doesn't like me, doesn't understand my position, and thinks I'm a bad guy. Right? So here we have the whole issue of self-defense. And the issue of self-defense is you may have a right as much as I have a right. You may be as right as I am. But I'm going to defend my right just as I expect you to defend your right. You can't tell me not to defend my right. And therefore, even though, for example, let's take the obvious case, I really sympathize with the ordinary Palestinian who has to suffer, whether he or she is in Gaza or on the West Bank, and there are different degrees. And I think it's horrible what they've been made to go through and who they've been made to go through it by and for what reason they've been made to go through it by. But the fact that they want to displace me and want to deny me my rights, at least certainly, Hamas does, but you can argue, that means that although I can sympathize with them and I really feel sorry for what they go through, I can't empathize. That's where the line comes, and those are the practical points.
Oh, okay. Well, the example that Paul Bloom gave was that the scenario of the therapist, right? That you go to a therapist and you're like in total rage, and then empathy for him would be the therapist goes into total rage, and they're both like screaming and yelling in total rage, and that's the definition of empathy. But for me, that's actually sympathy.
Yeah,
that's where the difference comes in. Yes. I see that as a sympathetic response, and in fact, for me, even for therapy in general, if you talk to therapists, they would say, well, what I actually do with the client is I feel into their experience, not by like mirroring their experience, but feeling the essence of what they are saying. And you're saying that, well, we can't do that. You're saying that is
I respect what you claim to be trying to do, but I can't actually believe you're doing it.
Yeah. And within therapy, one way they address that is saying, oh, I feel you're feeling angry. Am I hearing you correctly? So there's a sort of a checking in there.
That's right. And that's
for the accuracy of
But you could replace the word feel with sense. I sense your anger.
I see.
So these really, we're just playing with defining words.
Yeah, and that's why it's so important, because of what you're talking. I totally agree. It's helpful to have the words and the vocabulary and know what we're talking about for kind of clarity's sake. And I see my disagreement with Paul Bloom is about the definition.
That's right. That's all it is. Yeah. And it's a shame that we then pick on these nuances, but then it's inevitable.
Yeah.
Because, language is the important vehicle of thought.
Yeah, and in fact, the what I would call sympathy actually blocks empathy, because we see that, for example, if you say, well, my mother died. I mean, we see this, and you come to me and I say, oh, well, my mother died too, and let me tell you about how my mother died. And if you've kind of dealt with, from the emotions, the felt experience of it, is, your mother's died, you're feeling maybe anxious, or who knows what it is you're feeling, but you just want to be heard and seen for what's going on. And by the other person starting to talk about their mother who died, they actually take the awareness away from you. The empathy is how I see it, onto them. And so for me, actually, that is a block to empathy. So.
That's a good point, yes. I mean, where this first struck me is when I was a young rabbi and I had to go and visit people either in hospital or people who've, at funerals, somebody died. And everybody, sort of goes into the mourners and sit down and they say, I feel what you're feeling. I feel so bad for you. And I thought, I can't, that's not what they want. They don't want to hear words. They want me to hug them, basically. They just want an expression of I'm with you.
Yeah.
And
a sense of presence. They want this your presence to be there as a present, aware of who they are. It
also reminds you, Gray wrote that very popular book about men are for Mars and women for Venus. Which in its day was a sort of a breakthrough, because it highlighted the fact that when your wife comes home with a whole lot of complaints and so forth, the man thinks he has to solve the problems, whereas the woman just wants to express what she's been going through, not necessarily have the man solve it. So the man gets angry because he can't solve the problem. The woman gets angry because he's not listening to her. And so, this area of how we can express to other people that we care, even if we are different, we are the other, that interests me. And so I'm interested to know what steps you're taking in order to spread this awareness. How can we go on to the next stage? How do we get people to agree?
Well, I think it's a dialogue, really. It's like this, ongoing dialogue, and that's where the clarity sort of emerges. I see it seems like we're in agreement, actually, in terms of and it's the confusion of the language, that causes so much of the problems, and it's only through dialogue, like this constant dialogue, that we kind of come to this clarity, which was so nice that I just reached out to you. You just said, yes, sure, I'll talk to you. So that's really great.
Because so the more that we can do to increase the amount of communication and sympathy in the world, that can be our contribution. However, small I am, that's my little bit.
Yeah. Well, there's another part with within the therapeutic world, is that empathy is seen as a positive force in itself, like in terms of people feel like they need to do something, but like that story you're talking about, the people who are ill in the hospital, it's just the person, I would say it's your empathic presence coming to them, being present, sort of holding their experience, their feelings, that is actually a healing agent of itself. So it's for me, empathy is one of the most powerful healing, positive actions that you can take.
So are you saying, therefore, that empathy is a greater degree of sympathy? It's not a different phenomenon. It's the same phenomenon, but a different degree?
I think in this case, it's like the empathy is being present with the other person. And I see sympathy as sort of a self-awareness. Even when if you say, oh, I feel so sorry for what's going on for you, that it's really about me feeling sorry, and it's about my feeling of being sorry. So it has actually taken the presence away from the person who is in pain or in joy, and kind of taking it back onto myself in terms of feeling sorry.
You can't take it back, but you can share it, no? You can't take it back. How do you take it back?
Well, it's like, I mean, you have that sense, right? If you say that your mother has died, and you're feeling,
Yeah.
and then I start talking about me and my mother.
Well, that's, if you like, detracting from the pain the other person is feeling, because the other person is feeling this pain within himself.
Right. Uh-huh.
What you want to do is not, in a sense, to take the pain away, which you can't do. What you want to get that person to feel is that there's somebody else who cares about it. So, somebody else who's supportive.
Right. Uh-huh.
So, you know, if I see you, God forbid, you've broken your leg, I can't unbreak your leg, but I can be there with you either to distract you or to get you to think about other things or just to show I'm your friend. So you're not taking the pain away.
Right.
What you are doing is you're going from a position of saying, I sympathize with everybody who breaks legs. And then empathy would be, and I sympathize specifically with you for your broken leg.
I would say, see, for me, the sympathy is I see your broken leg and let me tell you about when I had a broken leg. Right?
Yeah, that's really getting onto the therapeutic side, isn't it?
Well, that's kind of the negative, because the person is saying, I'm in this pain, I'm dealing with this. I don't have the space and capacity to hear about your broken leg.
Right.
You know, because it's kind of like that's where the awareness, the focus of awareness is kind of that sympathy is sort of more of a self-centered,
sympathy starts with yourself.
With yourself.
Emotion that you yourself feel to some extent. And then the question is, where do we take it? Do we take it to the next stage of action? Do I therefore go out and bomb your enemy because he's your enemy? Or do I just try and make you feel better about it? Do I engage with you? These are all things that we take from the level of sympathy, which is, if you like, a lay level, the layman, onto the professional, whether it's a psychiatrist or a pastor or a priest, to then do something about it.
Yeah, well, the problem that I see with sympathy, it's like, oh, I remember when I broke my leg. Is I'm thinking from my frame of reference. So I will be solving a problem that is from my frame of reference of when I broke my leg versus being empathic with you in your frame of reference and solving your problem. And I
agree with that. But then if you're saying that, then it does not require you to have had the same experience.
Right.
Right? Whereas normally when you talk about empathy, it implies you've had a similar experience, which is another reason why we need somewhere in the middle. And so you might be saying, for example, well, that's what I mean by compassion. Compassion is a step further than sympathy, right? Sympathy is just, yes, I have had a similar experience. And then you go on to compassion, which says, really, I really want to do something to help you. But it's still not the third stage of empathy of actually having had that experience.
See, that's where we differ in terms of
definitions, that's all.
Of the definitions, is I don't see that you have had to have necessarily had the experience of breaking your leg.
Yeah, empathetic.
To be empathetic. And, you know, kind of the definitions I'm kind of basing on is the work of Carl Rogers, who had been, you know, he really kind of articulated the nature of empathy, especially in the therapeutic realm. And his thing is as humans, there's sort of like this common humanity that we have. And there's only a kind of a fixed set of common humanity. So when we feel into someone's experience, we're sort of like disconnecting with this common humanity anyways. So we don't necessarily have to have had a broken leg to experience it. We can still experience the constellation of feelings that the person with the broken leg is having. And we can sense, I mean, it's a nice word, sense. We can sense the pain. We can sense, you know, like maybe where the pain is, how they're dealing with the pain, and all the constellation of feelings around their experience.
Then let me ask you for a point of clarification.
Mm-hmm.
We humans, you think, you're suggesting, have a kind of an inbuilt sort of sympathy for other humans, part of the human world. And yet, there are those of us who are able to show horrific cruelty, almost like children picking off the wings of a fly towards other human beings. And I don't just mean in Hollywood or the Vikings or things of that kind. I mean the amount of horrific torture and killing that goes on in all societies. We think it's only going on in the Middle East. What's going on in our society here in America, where children are taken off the streets and disappear. We don't know what they went through by pedophiles or whoever it was. The constant beating of husbands to wives and others, the way that the kids are bullied all the time, almost seems to be endemic. Of course, we'll talk about all those experiments that went on about students being paid to be jailers and how they exert pain. Now, both of those tendencies exist within human beings. If you're a good Catholic, you'll say it's original sin. But I don't know if we can say that human beings have a built-in sympathy towards other human beings.
It wasn't a sympathy for human beings, but that we have kind of the same common humanity. We have that capacity for that lack of empathy, for that brutality.
But what difference does that make if we can still hurt another human being? It's just a sort of sentimentality.
Yeah, it's for me, the way I would be looking at that is those are the things that block empathy. Like there's this empathy to connect with that deeper humanity, our common humanity, and there are things that block it. In fact, I think that sympathy is a block to the humanity. So some of the criticism Paul Bloom has about empathy in terms of, you see somebody beating someone else, and then you feel like, oh, I have to kind of rescue that victim. That sympathy victimizes people. It says you are a victim instead of like being empathic with the experience, but also empathizing with the person who is supposedly doing the brutality, so that you have for example, I can give a narration of this. So in my family is very conservative. They're evangelical fundamentalist Christians. And I've been on this, movement to foster more empathy. How do we create more empathy in the world? And for them, it was all very strange. It was like, we don't know what you're talking about, right? So one time it was actually Christmas, and the kids, the little nephews and nieces, had gotten into some gifts that my mother had left behind the chair. And my sister-in-law was totally pissed at my mother for leaving the gifts there and the kids getting into it. And she started ranting at my mother. And then my mother turned around and said, "Don't you dare talk to me that way." And so they're going at each other. I mean, it was this, I had never seen it because my mother just kind of hit a breaking point or something. So they were going at each other. I mean, the tension was so thick in the room. Everybody's like moving into the corners out of the room. Get away from it. It looked like Christmas was going to just blow up with people being pissed off. But then I started empathizing with each person. So I said to my sister-in-law, I said, "Oh, I'm hearing that you're feeling very angry about the kids having gotten into the gifts." And then my sister-in-law says, yeah, that's right. I'm really pissed off. And then I said, "Well, I'm hearing that you feel that it's Jenny, that's my mother's, you think it's her fault. Is that right?" "Yeah, she left it there." And then after she kind of was heard, I then went to my mother, who was standing there, and I said, "Well, I'm hearing that you're really upset because, that you're being accused of this and being treated this way." And she says, "Yeah, that's right." And so I listened to her. And then I, to where the point where she kind of felt heard. Then I went to my sister-in-law, and for almost like 15, 20 minutes, I was going back between the two hearing, empathizing with both parties, which is what I consider empathy, to the point where they calmed down enough. I said, would you now be willing to listen to each other and reflect back what it is you hear the other person say until they feel heard? And I said, okay, we'll do it. And then they started doing it. And then one person would say something, the other person would want to jump in. I said, no, you'll be heard. Just reflect back what they're hearing. And they started going back and forth. And then the rest of the family, who'd been kind of hiding in the corners, they kind of came out, and it turned into this whole family empathy circle with, and I was kind of facilitating everyone dialoguing with each other. It went on for, 45 minutes. A half an hour or whatever, or almost an hour. And then my sister-in-law says, I feel like I don't belong in this family. I don't feel like I'm accepted. I come from a poor Russian family. You are, more wealthy. And I just don't feel like I really am accepted here. And then my father, he says, well, I came as a refugee to this country. Money doesn't mean anything to me. You've given me these beautiful grandchildren, and I love you. And they kind of got up and, hugged in the middle of the room. And then we kept going. The same thing happened with her and my mother. So that was it. Two parties. It looked like my sister-in-law was the perpetrator and the mother was the victim, but it was the empathy with both parties and then fostering empathy between them that got us down to really the common humanity, which was the sense of belonging and care. So it's just a narrative.
Well, that's an interesting story, and one which illustrates perfectly the issue. So the issue is simply this, that I am saying, take sympathy, apply sympathy to other people, and that equals empathy.
Yeah.
So what you're saying is, I'm sympathetic to people. I was sympathetic to my sister-in-law, I'm sympathetic to my mother, and I have this ability to sense the tension, and then I go further and I want to try to resolve the tension. The way I can resolve the tension is explaining my sympathy with each one to the other, so that then they are open to reconciliation. And so if you want to use the word empathy, I don't mind,
right,
so long as one is clarifying in advance the way one is using the word. That's all.
Mm-hmm. So what would be your sympathy when you say sympathy for the two parties?
Well,
what would that mean?
I am a person who cares.
Oh, okay.
Right? I'm a person who cares. I care about other people.
I see.
Right? I care about humanity. I don't just care about my own little square inch. And I desperately want to do what I can to make the world a better place. And then, in order to do that, some people just have that feeling and they never do anything about it, or they never have the opportunity. They're so busy making a living. I am fortunate that I chose a career in which I would be able to, actualize that through education or through the rabbinate or what have you. So it's taking steps to spread my feeling of humanity to a wider group of people by doing whatever I can to take away their hurt, to bring them together, to try to make the world a better place.
So what you're saying is you would want to say, in that situation for you, the sympathy would be like a statement of I care about what's going on here.
That's right. And not only do I care, but I'm prepared to do whatever I can to heal the hurt.
Okay. And what would you do in that situation? Like
exactly what you have done. I mean, what you did is beautiful. That's it. That's the way to do it.
Okay, so it sounds like you're using the sympathy as I care and I'm wanting to resolve the problems and kind of heal and bring people together with this.
And the more I do that in relation to other people, the more I involve empathy in the process.
Mm-hmm.
So, it's just a matter of definition. That's all it is.
Yeah. So that's the other part is I did see you mentioned about empathy, that you wouldn't empathize with someone who doesn't want, like with the Palestinian situation, because the people see you as an enemy. And the one part for me about empathy is that empathy doesn't mean agreement.
No.
If you empathize with somebody and you really hear them, it doesn't mean that you agree with what they're saying. It only says, I do hear and understand.
That's correct. That's correct. But here we have a situation where I may be dealing with somebody who, the moment I walk away from healing his wound, may want to stab me in the back.
Mm-hmm.
So, I didn't mean to say I don't sympathize or don't even empathize with most Palestinians. I just don't empathize with those who want to dispossess me or kill me or what have you. So in that sense, you might say there is a slight difference between the Christian ethic of turning the other cheek and the Jewish one, which doesn't believe in turning the other cheek as such. It does believe in not being aggressive unless you have to under the most extreme circumstances. But it doesn't believe that that you should act as if there were no offense.
Mm-hmm.
You have to take the offense, but then try and deal with it therapeutically.
Mm-hmm. So if someone is wanting you harm, that they're like offending you, and then you deal with that sense of them wanting to do you harm, and you
yes, and I would try to do that as much as possible by hearing their pain,
mm-hmm.
hearing what their problem is, as indeed you did, then trying to get them to see things from another point of view and seeing if we can't find some common ground.
Yeah. Well, it sounds very the same as what I'm talking about.
I think it is. And that's why I come back to what I say at the beginning. I think we're just playing with words, really, not with the actuality of what we feel and what we want to do about it.
Well, how do we work this out then? Because for me, it's kind of frustrating, when Paul Bloom's out there kind of criticizing empathy, because for me, it's like what he is criticizing, I actually agree with.
Yes.
But then he dismisses the empathy, and then it's like it takes the vocabulary away to express myself.
This is a good point, because what you're not seeing is that he is a philosopher. So he is tackling at this purely from a philosophical point of view, which is involved in definition of words and is not concerned with the emotion. You are concerned more with the emotional element here. And so this is another example of your sister-in-law and your mother. You're going to end up together because you're really not speaking differently. You are really saying the same thing, but he's speaking as a philosopher and you're speaking as a good guy who wants to make the world a better place. And he's a professional in one area, so that determines how he thinks and how he writes and the sorts of books he writes. In other words, he's not going to write a popular do-it-yourself bestseller, but he is going to write, in essence, something that tackles a problem from a purely intellectual, semantic point of view. That's all it was.
Mm-hmm. So it's just a matter of kind of detached words, semantic
that's what
words. Yeah.
That's what I think.
Well, I know we had said half an hour that I didn't want to keep you over because I thought I'm glad to chat it, longer if you're wanting to, but I also want to keep within the time frame because this is like really fascinating and just really enjoyed this this dialogue because that's what I try to do. Is I try to reach out to people who are saying against. I've reached out for 3 years to Paul Bloom to talk like this, like we're talking, but he won't talk to me. He'll only talk via email. So.
Right.
It's kind of odd.
No, I mean, I'm going to continue again. And, if you make a list of points that you want to take up and take to the next stage, well, let's arrange to have another session.
Okay. Great. I had invited Paul Bloom to an empathy circle. So an empathy circle is where we use empathic listening with each other. And the person that inspired him, Jesse Prince, I don't know if he is the person who started this against empathy critique, and then Paul Bloom was inspired by him and kind of built on it. And Jesse's like great. We've done empathy circles together, and he's really But we'd be glad to. If you have other thoughts too, let me know. We can take it.
Okay, with pleasure. But all I can say is more power to your elbow. The more you can do to spread the good word, the more I'm on your side.
Yeah, and thanks for your openness and willing to just engage in dialogue. So really,
That's one
been a
of the
pleasure.
pleasures of life, particularly I have in retirement. I have the time to do it. When I'm under pressure, I don't. So anytime, and it's really a pleasure meeting you.